Sometimes it takes a while for a band to find their audience. Maybe their sound isn't quite refined. Perhaps their debut doesn't quite connect. Could be that their hometown crowd aren't quite receptive. For Violent Femmes, right out of the gate, their debut was a perfect encapsulation of who they were. Snaking bass lines, minimalist drums, scrappy acoustic guitar, and frontman Gordon Gano's snottily yelped teenage desperation. But in 1983, it wasn't a hit. They were a 90s band trapped in the wrong decade. Folk and punk in equal measure, this is the story of the Violent Femmes' self-titled debut. Formed in Milwaukee in 1981, Violent Femmes had a less than standard origin. Bassist Brian Ritchie and drummer Victor DeLorenzo had assembled a rhythm section for hire, playing in and around Milwaukee in bands with names like the Rhomboids, Hitler's Missing Testy, and Trance and Dance. Despite this, 21-year-old Ritchie had an assorted background in big band, jazz, neo-psychedelia, and punk. DeLorenzo, 6 years older, had studied under a contemporary of Buddy Rich. As such, they could lend themselves to pretty much any sound. Gordon Gano was still in high school. He was what can be described as a character. He liked sport, but was a devout churchgoer. He would come to school on a Monday with a bathrobe over his clothes, as if to visually imply a sentiment of, "I got up for this." In essence, a short, weird kid, who would have been beaten up more if he wasn't so charismatic. But in addition to this, he'd also been writing songs on his acoustic guitar, and playing them sporadically in coffee shops around town. He'd grown up listening to the Carter Family, Johnny Cash, and Bob Dylan.
And the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord.
So I laughed in his face and I spit in his eye. With 18 minutes, there must be some way out of here, said the joker to the thief.
That was until, at the age of 15, an older brother had taken him to a Heartbreakers show. His songs reflected this collision of lyrical folk and country, and the frenzy of New York punk. Ritchie was made aware of Gano via a friend, who called him a pint-sized Lou Reed. Some months later, Gano recruited the Rhythm Combo to back him for a school assembly, a performance to celebrate him being inducted into the National Honor Society. Without much of a rehearsal, and as an act of defiance, and reference to Elvis Costello's similar SNL bait and switch, Gano replaced the agreed-upon good friend for the more provocative "Gimme the Car."
I ain't no runt, come on girl, gimme your...
The phantom rhyme provoked the crowd to near riot, with the faculty trying unsuccessfully to halt the performance. Safe to say that Gano was never inducted into the National Honor Society. In its place, Violent Femmes.
You're going to tell me how you got the name Violent Femmes.
Well, when I was growing up on the west side of Milwaukee, we called a sissy or a wimp. Well, you know, sort of like you were when you were a kid, Howard.
I never was a sissy or a wimp.
I know, I'm just kidding. But that's what we call a femme.
I never knew a sissy or a wimp.
Of course, violent is the opposite of that, so it's just a contradiction.
Violent Femmes was supposed to be a temporary arrangement. Ritchie and DeLorenzo, sick of the Milwaukee scene, planned to move to Minneapolis to join another band in autumn 1981. It didn't help that their hometown rock clubs were not welcoming of their mutant folk-punk jazz sound, and so they rarely booked gigs. Ritchie struck upon a left-field solution. If the clubs didn't want them, they'd just play wherever. They play on the street. The mechanics of playing outdoors and unamplified recalibrated their sound. Gano remained with his acoustic. Ritchie wielded a massive mariachi bass, and DeLorenzo created what he called the tranceophone, a floor tom with a metal bucket on top, mounted on a snare stand, which he would then play with brushes. The setup was consciously similar to the one Gene Vincent and his Blue Caps used.
Well, she's the gal in the red blue jeans.
It also served as a counter to the other rock music of the time, loud and overproduced. This was like a reverse Like a Rolling Stone moment for punk. Gano's lyrics weren't overshadowed by distorted guitars and booming drums. The lyrics were now the focus.
Special favors come in 31 flavors. We're out of mint, pass the lifesavers.
And busking was getting them noticed. In August 1981, outside the Oriental Theatre, They were playing to the punters waiting to go inside. One of the people that had stopped and watched commented in an English accent that they reminded him of the Stray Cats.
Stray cats strut over, I'm a feeling Casanova, hey!
But that the Femmes were better. It turned out to be James Honeyman Scott of the Pretenders.
Maybe tomorrow, maybe someday.
He went back into the theatre, grabbed the rest of the band, and brought them out to listen. We played about 4 songs, the last one being Girl Trouble, with the incredibly catchy refrain.
Girl trouble up the ass, girl trouble up the ass.
We're singing this and Chrissie Hynde is just cracking up. She can't believe it. So after we get done, she says, "Do you want a gig tonight?" So in between the support and the Pretenders, Violent Femmes played 4 songs to a hostile crowd that started booing them the minute they walked on stage. But Ritchie and DeLorenzo never ended up going to Minneapolis. The fact that professional musicians appreciated what they were doing urged them to continue on, eventually getting some more inside gigs. What really broke the band was a year later when they played New York supporting Richard Hell. The New York Times' Robert Palmer devoted a single paragraph to the headliner, and the rest of his review raving about the Milwaukee three-piece. The sound that results from this unlikely concatenation echoes all sorts of antecedents, from skiffle music to Dylan, to early Velvet Underground, to Jonathan Richman, to punk rock without the amplification. But most of all, the sound is genuinely new. If the major record labels were less financially strapped and more adventurous, this young and extraordinarily talented band would be some artist development department's dream come true. The buzz generated by this review got the band signed by Premier Indie Slash for the grand total of f*** all, but it was perfect timing. The month prior, the Femmes had self-funded the recording of their debut album, and Slash were the only label willing to release this acoustic punk oddity as is. As Victor DeLorenzo was the oldest member of the band, he took it upon himself to fund the album, accruing merely several handfuls of spare change from busking. He went to his father, who lent them $10,000. In July 1982, they entered Shade Tree Recording by Lake Geneva, situated inside a hotel of a Playboy resort. But the process of recording was constantly disrupted, as the studio was in the process of being sold. Each new session, another piece of gear was missing. We later found out that the studio was going bust, hence the gear being sold, and the engineer was in fact the janitor. He's got to be the only janitor with a platinum record to his credit. 18 at the time of recording, the songs had been written by Gano throughout his teen years, and so were caked in teenage frustration, isolation, and alienation. On Kiss Off, he feels so very much that no one around him truly understands him.
I need someone, a person to talk to, someone who care to love. Could it be you?
Leading to depression in its infamous pill-taking bridge.
I take one, cause you left me, and two for my family.
Please Do Not Go dwells on an unrequited crush.
But then she like another guy.
With little chance of reciprocation.
I fall down dead, she never see the tears I cry.
While Prove My Love continues this theme, with increased desperation and bargaining.
What do I have to do and prove my love to you?
The most unsettling expression of teenage male id is the sweaty 6-minute maelstrom, Add It Up. Formed around the hormonal compulsion, the single-minded objective of losing one's virginity.
Why can't I get just one screw? Why can't I get just one screw?
And Gano's protagonist, not having much luck in that regard.
Believe me, I know what to do, but something won't let me make love to you.
The song burns with anger, becoming a quest for the protagonist to get something he feels he is entitled to.
I get angry, and I will sing.
And is enraged that so far he has been denied. The song's title refers to a sex worker counting the assorted coinage once his objective had been achieved.
Wait a minute, honey, I'm gonna add it up. Add it up, add it up.
One late verse's metaphor comparing the protagonist's manhood to a firearm has taken on an increasingly queasy association in the aftermath of real-life events. Too many sexless murderers, radicalized by misogynistic commentators.
Don't shoot that thing at me. Don't shoot that thing at me.
But Gano had no homicidal inclination. He was just trying to work dark thoughts and feelings out through fiction. Written with a knowing humour, for the most part his words remain diaristic, instead of something you might find in a manifesto.
Words to memorize, words hypnotize, words make my mouth exercise.
A lot of it was just having to do with some outlet. Like, if I didn't write a song that I felt really good about every couple of days, I'd really feel out of sorts. So it was a way of letting out frustrations and feeling like I was doing something that was constructive, or good, or something I could use one day. A lot of the feeling, I guess, came from like when people write blues songs. Writing something, then singing about it, and it feels better. The music itself suited the awkwardness of its themes, constructed of their unique, feral acoustic punk. Their guitars taking a back seat to Ritchie's relentless, propulsive bass avalanches. But their influences poke through. Prove My Love inverts a songwriting conceit from the Ramones, Judy is a Punk.
Third verse, same as the first. Just last night I was reminded of.
The xylophone-spirited Gone Daddy Gone steals a whole verse from the Willie Dixon blues standard, I Just Wanna Make Love to You.
Tell by the way that you switch and walk.
I can see by the way you baby talk.
I can see by the way that you baby talk. I can know by the way that you treat your man.
And the same kind of romantic frustration atop rudimentary instrumentation that pervades the album is similarly found in the work of Jonathan Richman.
Girls could not resist the stare. Pablo Picasso never got called an asshole.
Though the album is full of first-hand adolescent insecurity, its fidgety opener, Blister in the Sun, was intended for someone else to sing. Blister in the Sun was actually written for a woman I'd met at poetry reading. She wanted to form a band like the Plasmatics. And maybe I'd play guitar, and I wanted a song I could offer. But the rehearsal got cancelled and I never heard from her again. I hear she joined a cult and moved to Canada. The references to Big Hands were an inversion of love song tradition, men singing about objects of affection, emphasizing their small features. It was also another chance to show Gano's insecurity. Being 5'2", he lacked what he felt women were attracted to.
Go on, big hands, I know you're the one.
The lyrics, for the most part, were a stream of consciousness, a collection of phrases that sounded good. But together they formed a picture in listeners' minds that completely eluded its writer.
Body and beats, I stain my sheets, I don't even know why.
Sometime in the 90s, years after the song had been out, I was talking to somebody that I had just met, and they were talking about the song, and eventually said, well, you know what the song is about, you wrote it. I was like, what do you mean? They were like, oh, come on, you know what it's about. And I said again, what are you talking about? They wouldn't say. But then finally they were like, well, the song is about masturbation. And that was the first time I had ever heard that. Now I have come to the realization there's a large percentage of people who think that about the song, but I had never thought of that. One other theory is that the song is about heroin addiction, with certain phrases sparking that association.
Then I'm so strung out, I'm high as a kite, I just might.
Gano has confirmed that the line about staining sheets is about wet dreams. His sexual frustration ready to pop like the titular metaphor.
Let me go on, like I blister in the sun.
The girlfriend crying is less certain. Perhaps his nightly expulsions are causing her to feel he is resorting to his subconsciousness for satisfaction, rather than reality and her.
My girlfriend, she's at the end, she is starting to cry.
Either way, it makes sense that Ritchie claims that Gano's best songs were written when he was a virgin. Though a fan favourite and the song college radio would latch upon, Blister in the Sun was not the album's lone single, Slash pushing Gone Daddy Gone instead.
Gone, daddy, gone. Love is gone. It's gone, daddy, gone. Love is gone. It's
The album, self-titled, was released in April 1983, but sales were unimpressive, despite the UK press briefly hailing the band as the future of rock and roll. Their infiltration of popular culture would take another decade to truly take hold. The Femmes followed up their self-titled debut a little over a year later, with May 1984's Hallowed Ground. The reason for the quick turnaround was that they had already been playing most of album 2 before recording their first. Gano seemed to have a lot of feelings to sing out. Where their debut had been more of a rock album, Hallowed Ground was more eclectic, taking in country, gospel and Christian themes, less horny and more death-obsessed and God-fearing. For example, Country Death Song was written as a school creative writing experiment,
guaranteed to get your own place in hell.
embodying the macabre murder ballads of old.
Take your lovely daughter and throw her in the well.
The title track begins with a reading from the book of Hosea,
The prophet is a fool. The spiritual man is mad.
chapter 9, verse 7.
For the multitude of thine iniquity and the great hatred.
And Jesus Walking on the Water is a surprisingly straight-faced Sunday school hoedown.
Jesus walking on the water, sweet Jesus walking.
The UK press thought it was satire, bad on purpose, and applauded their subversiveness. But Gano was just expressing his faith, his Baptist upbringing with a preacher father. I don't write those kinds of songs as an exercise, or because I like the general spirit of gospel music, but because of sincere feelings coming from myself. It means something to me. It's important in my life, and it comes out in songs. His God-forward songs had proved a sticking point within the band when recording their first album. Though not that way inclined, De Lorenzo enjoyed the theatrical aspect, but Ritchie vetoed their original inclusion due to his devout atheism. What changed his mind was how much these Christ-aligned country songs were pissing off audiences. As their work up to this point had shown, Ritchie was a believer in punk as an attitude, rather than a sound. In a similar way to the Replacements weaponizing shambolic pop covers, the Femmes were enacting the ultimate subversion by playing the exact opposite of what their crowds were expecting. Unsurprisingly, much of the goodwill they had earned from their fanbase was exhausted by this unpredictability. Though overall perhaps a more solid album than their debut, Hallowed Ground sold worse, in part because Slash simply wanted their debut again, and were unsatisfied with what they had been given. Slash didn't promote it in any way. Sometime afterwards we were told it was a deliberate choice to do absolutely nothing for Hallowed Ground, because they wanted to teach us a lesson. They wanted to make sure it'd be a failure.
Do you like American music?
As the 80s progressed, Violent Femmes released another couple of albums. Their Jerry Harrison produced The Blind Leading the Naked in 1986, and their confusingly titled fourth album, Free, in 1989, neither of which set the world on fire. However, in the background, their debut continued to sell. By 1991, nearly a decade after release, it became one of the few albums to have gone platinum in the US, without ever having charted on the Billboard 200. It appeared on the chart for the first time that same year, peaking at number 171. College radio and word of mouth kept these songs alive. Teenagers forever able to relate to Gano's adolescent dissatisfaction. Somebody told me once, if you haven't heard of the band before college, you will hear about Violent Femmes when you go to college. Somebody's going to be playing it in the dorm or at a party. I've heard many times that older brothers and sisters got their younger brothers and sisters listening to it. I think that that's been a big part of our career, is having these other generations that have found out about our music. By the turn of the 90s and the thrust of alternative rock into the mainstream, Violent Femmes have finally found their audience. Teenage angst was starting to pay off well, and the Femmes were being held up as pioneers, alongside R.E.M., Husker Du, The Replacements and Sonic Youth. In 1991, they even managed to score a modern rock number 2 hit with American Music. Gano's awkward desperation seeped into a generation of dorky, heart-on-sleeve rockers, while his quirky, impassioned but irregular vocal style can be heard throughout the spectrum of indie rock.
The sun, it is past, now it's blacker than black. I took my shirt off in the yard. Well, I went dream, magazine, fantasies, and make-believe. Valencia, and I will remember that summer. Do you know where the muffins go? They go along to take your honey.
Their debut also was, alongside the Pogues, Billy Bragg and Meat Puppets, an essential building block in the creation of folk punk. What is Against Me's reinventing Axl Rose album, if not a thrilling, politicised take on the Femmes? Furthermore, Hallowed Ground predated what became known as alt country or Americana, with Ritchie theorising they set the blueprint for this ragged gospel roots punk sound.
I change the kind of car I drive, so you can't see me when I go.
I'm going where there's no depression, to a better land. Got a landmine in my bloodline. I'm not immune to get blown apart. Don't like riding on the passenger side.
But really, anyone who had been aware of college radio in the 80s has a soft spot for the Violent Femmes.
Never said nothing.
I was a replacement streak, but the Violent Femmes made more important art. They had an almost drunken sensibility, but you knew they were deadly serious about music. They were just a trio, but they were alluding to a much bigger sound with only a few elements. Continuing their acceptance in the 90s, Violent Femmes also had their fair share of film and TV appearances. Blister in the Sun was used in the John Cusack Assassin Goes to His High School Reunion movie, Grosse Pointe Blank.
Let me go on. Big hands, I know you're the one. Remember.
In Reality Bites, Ethan Hawke's character proves why he was the wrong choice by pointedly performing Add It Up at Winona Ryder.
Why can't I get just one screw? Why can't I get just one screw? Believe me, I know what to do.
And the band even had an entire episode of Sabrina the Teenage Witch revolve around them.
I'd love to meet the Violent Femmes. When? Where?
You're going to see the Violent Femmes? You have to let me come with you. I will do anything to meet Gordon Gano.
You're going to see the Violent Femmes? Can I come too?
What's the name of the band again?
The Violent Femmes. Which is completely ironic because there aren't even any femmes in the band, let alone violent ones.
Sabrina and her friends go to a late-night record store signing. Magic and hilarity ensue.
A half-hour infatuation spell ought to work.
Wow! You're fantastic!
Only it wasn't supposed to be the Femmes. We were a late substitution. The whole thing had been planned for somebody probably that you would think would make more sense. Or you wouldn't go, that was very strange.
Can I play a song for you, Libby Chesler?
If you like.
Guys, let's do Please Do Not Go.
And they already had the whole script. They had everything done. But whoever the artist or band was, they had to cancel.
Tell your mind I'm stuck in this lovely girl.
Maybe whoever had been planned to do it might have made more sense. I mean, it couldn't have made less sense.
I wrote that for you even before I knew you existed.
I thought so.
But this willingness to lend out the Violent Femmes music would be their downfall. De Lorenzo had already left in 1983 due to continued disagreements within the band. 5 albums of varying quality peppered the 90s before in 2009 the Femmes broke up. The reason was Gano had licensed Blister in the Sun to the fast food chain Wendy's a couple years earlier.
Because Wendy's chili is simmered on a stove and made with care, and baked potatoes are pulled from the oven.
Ritchie was appalled and sued his bandmate for belated songwriting royalties. the majority of their songs credited solely to Gaynor. When you see dubious, or in this case disgusting uses of our music, you can thank the greed, insensitivity and poor taste of Gordon Gaynor. It is his karma that he lost his songwriting ability many years ago, probably due to his own lack of self-respect, as his willingness to prostitute our songs demonstrates. But they wouldn't be gone for long. The original three-piece would briefly return to play Coachella in 2013, in part celebrating the 30th anniversary of their debut. DeLorenzo left again soon after. Since then, the band have released another couple of albums, but few would argue with their debut as being their defining moment. Back then, Violent Femmes' sound set them apart from their contemporaries. Before, they were freaks, but this eccentricity made them stand the test of time. With other albums released the same year, their synths and massive drum production feel trapped in 1983. However, Blister in the Sun, Gone Daddy Gone, and Kiss Off sound as fresh today as when the album was released. And partly this is because self-loathing and sexual frustration will always be universal painful themes that teenagers of any generation can cling to. It especially made sense within the mainstreaming of alternative rock in the 90s. It was embarrassingly honest music about what can be the most confusing time of your life. Violent Femmes' awkward songs will always be the perfect soundtrack for those awkward years. Thanks for watching. So what other bands do you think sound unlike the decade they're from? Comment down below. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and why don't you also do me a favour and share it with a couple of people. It really does help. As always, I'd like to shout out this month's new top tier supporters over on Patreon. Geordie Beckford, Gaines Goblin, John Ernberger, Candice Colby, and Maniac of Noise. Thanks also to Danny, who gifted me Stiff Little Fingers inflammable material from my Amazon wishlist. And I'll see you in 3 weeks for a return to synth pop.